here, Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Annual Legislative Conference, one of the biggest policy conferences in the world. And I'm so glad I got this dope sister with me, Miss Lauren Burke. You want to talk about a journalist that goes deep in the details, pulls the sheets back, wants to expose and tells you like it is. That's why I'm glad. Lauren, welcome to aurn. Thank you, sis.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Largest legislative policy conference. What is it that you want to see come up out of this? When we talk about policy.
When we talk about policy, I'm always looking at I flipped through the app, and by the way, whoever did the app did a very good job. You don't have to sign in or do anything complicated to do the CBC app, ALC 53 on the App Store. I look for all the money stuff, the wealth building, the owning the property, the owning the company, how we build wealth in the black community, I think is extremely important. When I walked in here yesterday to get my badge and I found a lot of stumbling and bumbling, as I did last year, I found out what company was doing that. And I said, who is this company? And I actually asked the executive director about hiring, about vendors, about black vendors, etc. Because that's how you turn the money.
Talk about that. Like
yeah,
when you walk into a venue, when
yes.
you're going to conferences, instead of being in awe
right.
of how things are,
right.
you need to be finding out what.
Right. I find out who's doing the hiring, where's the money going, who's getting paid, who the big contracts going to. Because every time we see a conference, and as journalists, we're at a lot of conferences, and I used to work in politics. I was a lot of conferences. So you see who puts it together. Somebody's got to do the credentials. Somebody's got to do the food. There's a lot of vendors. Somebody's got to figure out security. I got to give a shout out to Punch Bowl, actually, because when I go to their events, I saw a black security team today at one of their events.
Oh, you were paying attention.
Yes, and then I saw inside they had a vendor that was doing some art, two black vendors that were doing art. I appreciate that because I can notice that they're aware. And every time I go to a Punch Bowl event, I see some African Americans on stage. You know, so I'm looking at that obviously for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. I'm going to be looking even more for that. And the vendor that does their credential, I think, should be questioned. But we will. I'm still investigating that, so I don't want to get too far over my skis.
I love it. I love it. But you hit on something important. You hit on black wealth.
Right.
And I think that's the topic that we need to talk about more. Not just saying, okay, under this administration, we saw wages go up, but at the same time, there was a Brookings Institute that said the wealth gap, however, is getting wider. So higher wages, but a wider gap.
Right.
And so black folk are like, there's got to be a different way to this.
Right. Well, the wealth gap for us in for the African American community is huge. We're indexed at about 28%, meaning that of the black folks in the United States, which is about 42 million black people. I'm just going to say black. I'm not going to get into the details of who is from another country. Black. When you walk through the door, black. When there's a flashlight in your face on a police stop, you're considered black. That's how I define it. About 28% of that is underneath the poverty level. So that's a lot of folks in our communities that don't have a lot of money. And that's, of course, built on the fact of the 400-year history of the United States with regard to us being prohibited from owning land and owning property. To this day, and I cover a lot of news in Virginia, there are housing covenants in Virginia that say that you cannot, the blacks cannot buy,
These documents still exist.
Yes.
It's still on the books.
Yes.
And I don't think people really realize that. As much as we talk about how things have changed, there are things that have still remained the same, and ain't nobody pushing for it to change.
That's right. Well, I will say there are some black legislators in Virginia who've been very mindful of some of these old laws that have been on the books and have gone after them, to their credit. But, you know, a lot of times it's hard to find some of these laws. But also, even without the law or with the law, you still have the problem of the legacy.
Yes.
Because people need to have wealth ownership and wealth building that goes generation to generation to generation. In my family, it only goes back 2 generations. My grandmother came over here from Barbados. From one side of my family is up from slavery, Virginia. The other side, the New York side, is from Barbados. And my grandmother came over here with her grandmother as domestics, cleaning women.
Yeah.
And they hustled and bought what is now a piece of property in Brooklyn, New York that is valued at over $1 million because they bought it in the 1950s. What was considered then a single-family house is a 3,000 square foot piece of property. That was a single family house in the 50s.
Right.
But you had to hustle for that, of course. They had to make a big sacrifice for that.
Right.
But you've got to pass that wealth down through the generations of the family. You've got to make it easier for other members of the family to live without the mortgage and the rent and the things that keep people down, because we know when you pay over 30% of your income on rent, it is extremely difficult to make it.
Absolutely. So you talked about your story, and I've interviewed you before, but I've never asked you about your story.
My story is that I was born in the Bronx, New York. My dad was a cop. My mom's a teacher. My mother's from Virginia, Emporia. My father's from New York, New York. And my dad,
and a teacher.
a cop and a teacher. My mother actually went to Virginia State and Norfolk State, and then they got married, and then she had to come to New York and then get her degree. My father never got a degree. He got his GED and got on the New York City police force. Then worked at Rikers Island for over 20 years. Big pension, 3 kids. I was the youngest, and I was the only one that went to college. My sister is career Navy, so she went to the Navy in Norfolk. And my brother got a patronage job with the state because my mother worked for a politician. So I got a bunch of patronage jobs. So I worked in politics for a long time. But the point is, I was born in the Bronx, grew up on Long Island.
Yeah.
My grandmother was in Brooklyn. So I had 2 big houses in my life. I had my parents' house and my grandmother's house. So that wealth building was a huge deal because sure enough, it is inherited down, and then you buy other pieces of property. And you help out other family members that need help when they get in a jam.
But you're seeing something and brought up in something that a lot of people don't see or have lost. Because when we talk about how much land and property that the black community has lost, I mean, the numbers are ridiculous. I talk to John Boyd all the time over black farmers, and we are always talking about the loss of land and continued loss of land for black Americans, but how much that wealth means to us. When we talk about journalism, what brought you into the world of journalism? What compels you here?
Martin Luther King had a saying. I can't quote it as well as Roland Martin, but he said one of the pillars in the black community that's so important, of course, is journalism.
Yes.
You do have to have your own voice, your own ability to control your message, and you have to be able to do that and tell your story without the impediments of the society that we've all come in that has been extremely negative for African Americans over a 400-year period. You have to have your own platform. So the black press had that. You saw what a big difference it makes when Ebony Magazine and Jet can report about Emmett Till.
Yes.
And Mamie Till makes the decision to put that picture, that famous picture, on the cover. We control that content, we control the message, and we control how our people are seen, male and female. We realize that when other people control that, there is typically, remember we had the racial reckoning after George Floyd died in May of 2020, and there was a bunch of apologies by some of these white platforms that have been around forever.
I reckon that has not...
Remember that? The Baltimore Sun, the KC Star. The best one was probably the KC Star. They apologized, and what did they say? And it was quite candid. We have spent years negatively covering black communities that we did not know anything about. And really it's a way of, it's like the same reason people watch Jerry Springer. They want, it's like the James Baldwin documentary, I'm Not Your Negro.
Oh my gosh,
it's like I've got to feel better about myself, so I got to put somebody else down, and that happens in the newspaper all the time. Ida Wells is one of my biggest drivers. I worked in politics as well, and as a matter of fact, my last political job was for the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Justin Fairfax. I was his comms director. In my view, he was completely railroaded and treated extremely unfairly, and the whole thing reminded me of Ida Wells, because even though we understand as women that sexual violence is an issue that needs to be confronted, and has needed to be confronted since the Bible days for 1,000 years. So that was real. That was something that needed to be discussed. However, Ida Wells has probably taught us, and so many other incidents, you do have to check. There has to be an evidentiary process. It can't just be based on declaring that something is true and that it's true. So in my view, Justin got railroaded, but that moment really reminded me of Ida Wells, because when I read back, so much of it was familiar. Of course, Justin is alive. He was not lynched. He was not physically lynched. He is alive. But his reputation, of course, was greatly damaged and destroyed. So that was an interesting moment.
When you hear being at the CBC, and we were talking about policy earlier, and everyone's going to be talking about, the upcoming election. We have 2 candidates. We have Vice President Kamala Harris, who everyone was thought wouldn't do anything, and comes on the scene and literally changes now. I think, how politics is going to be done in many ways. I do
Absolutely.
believe that. And then former President Donald Trump with what she said, the same old tire playbook. What are some of the demands, though, do you think that we need to have regardless of who is in office? Because I don't want us to have rose-colored glasses.
Right.
No matter who it is.
Well, one of the demands is that she hire some black folks. I get what she's doing, okay, because we know what she's doing because Barack Obama had to do the same thing, then U.S. Senator. You know, black candidates are generally told that you have to not scare white folks as you run, okay, and you have to tell white folks that, look, I'm the president of everybody, which she's already stated.
Right.
That's a requirement that only black candidates nationally have had to deal with. So I get what the vice president's doing. This is about winning elections. I'm a big believer in let's not, it's about winning the election.
Absolutely.
Okay. At the same time, I do want to see some more black staffers in some more key positions that make decisions that are not based on somebody over them making that decision. And I do want to see more of a focus, which she's there already, on economics in the black community. And you obviously
economic
exactly.
Yeah.
And she's talking to that. She's talking about the small business piece, which is huge in our community because the biggest grower of small business is black women.
Absolutely.
So she's doing very well on touching on specific policy and not just talking in platitudes,
Exactly. And people, it kills me when people say,
I know.
I don't know who she, I don't know
know
what her platform. Not only did she put it on her site, she's been talking about it since way before DNC.
Right.
Every speech
Right.
that she has had, she has
That's
gone
right.
over it. Even when she was doing the debate, she took the question and said, first, let me talk about my platform,
That's
my
right.
agenda, and went down the list.
That's right.
And I wonder, when people do that, I'm like, you don't want to know about it because you've already formed an opinion.
Well,
And you're not, and the demand for her to give her platform
Right.
is not the demand that you have on Donald Trump, who has given no policy, all spin in incoherent sentences.
Right. Well,
The bar for him is there a bar?
Well, not only is there a double standard, as you just mentioned, between Vice President Harris and former President Trump, there's also a media ecosystem on the right that is effectively it's basically a political arm and a political platform for the RNC masquerading as journalism. I'm not going to say that it's that much different in some ways on the left. We do have MSNBC. We see that MSNBC is effectively a platform for the left, just as Fox is a platform for the right. But now it's starting to get without pretense. People used to pretend, and we used to have an equal time rule before Ronald Reagan, all right? But now people are not pretending to be political. Now, the First Amendment effectively allows media organizations to do that without a threat to their FCC license, which I'm always a little surprised at, but okay.
That has been one thing that's been on my
Right.
mind. I used to my boss and be like, can
Right.
we just
Right.
people? I
Right.
thought we couldn't.
Right.
Okay.
If you couch something under opinion, you pretty much get away with anything as long as it's
Yeah.
true and you're not committing defamation. Okay. But for the most part, now we're getting political platforms like OAN, Daily Call, or Daily Signal. These are effectively political outfits in the guise of a media platform, and they're not even really trying to pretend. But I can't say, on the left we have the 19th. We have stuff on the left that is certainly leaning left politically. There's certainly articles you would not see there. But when it comes to things like the Washington Examiner and some of the things I see, I'm like, why not just declare yourself a political actor? So that has been a struggle for the Democrats because the Republicans have done a better job at messaging in their ecosystem and building their ecosystem, putting money into that. And that's why a lot of false and misinformation gets out.
All right, Lauren. This is why I love having a sister on and love talking to you.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Talk about some of the things as we come to it, and what are some of the things that you're working on? Any of the pieces that you're working on?
Well, I'm actually working on the vendor situation at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation.
Yeah. We are going to get to the root.
I'm asking about the vendors. Who gets hired when we put this big, I shouldn't say we, when they put this big production on, which I'm sure is a multi-million-dollar, if not $100,000 production. You see the main sponsors are Amazon and so forth and so on. They may not have anything to do with picking the vendors, for all I know.
Right.
Might be the executive director, but I'm trying to find that out. I'm asking the members, who are the vendors? We already know that the credentialing company is a predominantly white, female-owned company that did the credentials called APCO. So if you go to the website, you can see that.
Okay.
And I said, well, why isn't a black-owned company do credentials? Because one thing that I know we could do as black people it's communications. There's a lot of black women in
we can do.
communications.
Absolutely.
Some sectors we don't feel that much, but I know we can do the food and the catering. I know we can do the music.
We've been doing that forever.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
We typically can do branding, marketing, and communications. So that's what I'm looking at. And we're in Washington, D.C., otherwise known as Chocolate City.
Well,
So to me,
not so chocolate
that is
anymore.
changing, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at the vendor situation at CBCF.